Hi and welcome everyone. Okay, so in today's lesson, we will be talking about reported speech. Now, from what I hear, many students, when they hear reported speech, they think that it's very hard and complicated. But if you understand the basic concept of it, it really isn't. It is exactly what reported means. What does reported speech mean? Let's see here. What is reported speech? So reported speech is a way how we report what someone has said by changing some of the words or tenses said, but retaining the same meaning, but keeping the same meaning of what the other person has said. For an example, if I say, I love the Toy Story film. I love Toy Story films. So this is a direct speech. So in reported speech, we have direct speech and we have indirect speech. Direct speech is what someone says, and indirect speech is what you are reporting that someone said. Okay? So another example, if I say, I'll phone you tomorrow, or then you would go back and say, she said she was going to phone me tomorrow. So this is direct speech and indirect speech. So how, do you know how to report what someone else said and how to report what someone else said? Now, reported speech is when we tell someone what another person said. Okay? For example, I tell my class, so you guys have an exam tomorrow. So you would go back and tell your mom or your sister, Miss Nasreen said that we have an exam tomorrow. So this is what reported speech means. So like I said, reported speech is when we tell someone what another person said. And to do this, we can use direct speech or indirect speech. For example, I work in a bank, said Daniel. And then this is direct speech. Indirect speech, Daniel said he worked in a bank. Okay, direct speech is what someone says. Indirect speech is what is repeated. Okay, so in indirect speech, we often use a tense which is further back in the past. For example, work becomes worked. Like for the example, I work in a bank, Daniel said. We cannot say Daniel said he worked in a bank. No, we say Daniel said he worked in a bank. So we use the tense which is further back in the past. Work becomes worked than the tense originally used. Okay, so this is called backshift. So when we backshift, we are changing the tenses because we cannot repeat the tense that was said to us. Okay, so this is called backshift. We also may need to change other words that were used, for example, pronouns. So we have the present simple, we're going to use present continuous, and the present perfect. When we backshift, present simple changes to the past simple, present continuous changes to the past continuous, and the present perfect changes to the past perfect. Just remember, present simple changes to the past simple, present continuous changes to the past continuous, present perfect changes to the past perfect. Okay, easy. The past simple and the past continuous. When we backshift, past simple usually changes to the past perfect simple, and the past continuous usually changes to the past perfect continuous. Okay. For example, we lived in China for 5 years. Okay, this is direct speech. Indirect speech becomes, she told me they lived in China for 5 years. So another example, It was raining all day. Direct speech, indirect speech. He told me it had been raining all day. So the past perfect doesn't change, okay? No back shift. So now let's see, reported speech and reporting verbs. We can report what people say with direct speech in inverted commas or reported speech. When we say what someone says, we have to put commas at the beginning, at the end of the quote of exactly what the person said, okay? Because this is a reported speech. It's not what you said, it's what they said, okay? So remember, we have to put the inverted commas from the beginning of what the person said to the end of the sentence. Now, here we have complete the indirect speech. Like I said, this is direct speech on your left. How are we going to change it to indirect speech? So if I ask, why are you late? Indirect speech, what does it become? He asked me why. Think about it. We are trying to manage. I booked it last week. Have you been to Spain? I won't be able to come. We can come tomorrow. So why are you late? Let's see what it changes to indirect speech. If he asks you, why are you late? We say, he asked me why I was late. We are trying to manage becomes, he said they were trying to manage. This is reporting speech. I booked it last week. He said he had booked it last week. Okay, so do you see here on your left what someone has said is in commas. There's commas in the beginning and at the end. And if it's a question, you have to put the question mark. If it's just a regular sentence, you put a full stop. Next we have you been to Spain is a question, and it's, you know, it's a direct speech. It's what someone has said or what someone has asked you. Indirect speech changes to, she asked if I had been to Spain. Okay. Our next example, I won't be able to come. This is direct speech in commas, beginning and at the end, and it's just a normal sentence. How do we change it to indirect speech? Indirect speech, it becomes, she said she wouldn't be able to come. Okay, our next example, we can come tomorrow, in quotation. They said they could come tomorrow, indirect speech. Very easy. So we're just changing the tenses like I said. What is the tense change? So present simple, what did we say changes to? Present simple, think about it just a little bit. Present simple changes to what? Present continuous changes to what? The past simple changes to what? Present perfect changes to what? And the future changes to what? I said it in the beginning of the video. Let's see. Present simple changes to the past simple. Present continuous changes to the past continuous. Past simple changes to the past perfect. Present perfect changes to the past perfect. Will, future, changes to would, and can changes to could. That's it. Very easy. So this page right here, you must memorize it. In order to understand reported speech, you must memorize that we change present simple to past simple, present continuous to past continuous, past simple to past perfect, present perfect to past perfect, will to would, can, and to could. If you memorize this, you will get reported speech very easy. Also, we will continue reported speech into our next semester. So, here is another note that's very important. Would, could, should, might, and ought to, they stay the same. We do not change these. Okay, so would, could, should, might, and ought to stay the same. Remember that. For example, I would like to solve the problem as soon as possible. She said that she would like to solve the problem as soon as possible. So would stays the same. Another example, must changes to had to, or this is a rule actually. Must changes to had to. Mustn't stays the same, which means, it doesn't change. Okay, so must changes to had to, and mustn't or must not stays the same. Okay, it doesn't change. So remember, would, could, should, might, and ought to stay the same. No transformation, no change in tenses. And that's it. So must changes to had to, and mustn't stays the same. Next we have with orders, advice, and requests. So if we have any sentences ordering, or any sentences advising, or any request, we use the infinitive after the object. Okay? For example, call me back later. How do we change it to indirect speech? She asked him to call her back later. Example, don't worry. Direct speech, indirect speech, my manager told me not to worry. Okay? Another one, could you help me? I asked him to help me. Okay? So if you say, can you help me? And then you're talking to your sister, and you would tell her what happened, you would tell her the story, you would tell her, I asked him if he could help me. So this is what reported speech means. You also have to remember, you usually have to change pronouns. For example, I like, she said, she liked. Okay, when we change it to from direct to indirect. And if you report what someone said on a different day or in a different place, some time and place words can change. For example, tomorrow becomes the next day. Okay? Here becomes there, and this becomes that. Okay? So remember, if you want to report what someone said on a different day or in a different place, some time and place, words can change. Tomorrow becomes next day, here becomes there, and this becomes that. Here we have the direct questions, and this is direct questions, and how do we change it to the indirect questions? If I ask, what's your name? And then you would be talking to your friend, and you would say, she asked him what was his name. Where do you live? Do you speak English? Are you employed? So let's see what they become into indirect questions. If someone asks you, what's your name? You would report it and say, she asked him what his name was. Where do you live? She asked him where he lived. Okay? Do not use do. We do not say, she asked him where he lived. No. So, where do you live? She asked him where he lived. That's it. Simple as that. Do you speak English? She asked him, we can say whether or if he spoke English. Are you employed? What does that indirect? She asked him if he was employed, or she asked him whether he was employed. Okay, whether or if mean the same. Where did you work before? She asked him if he had worked before. Okay, so this is kind of a little bit harder, but just look at it. What's your name? We change it in direct speech. If you want to report it and you're talking to your friend and you say, she asked him what his name was, and you're talking in a conversation about what happened. Where do you live? She asked him where he lived. Do you speak English? She asked him if he spoke English. Speak changes to spoke. Are you employed? She asked him whether or if he was employed. And where did you work before? She asked him if he had worked before. Now, the reporting verbs. We have the structures after reporting verbs. After reporting verbs, there are different patterns using the gerund and the infinitive. For example, Jude offered to drive me to the airport. I promised not to tell anyone. The doctor advised me to have a rest. I persuaded my sister not to sign the contract. I apologized for being late. The police accused Carl of stealing the car. Okay, so these are all reporting verbs. Now, there are two ways to report, with say or with a reporting verb. For example, Jude said he would drive me to the airport. Okay, so when over here, Jude offered to drive me to the airport. Okay, or you can say Jude said he would drive me to the airport. You are reporting. You are telling your mom or your friend, Jude said that he would drive me to the airport. Or you could say Jude offered to drive me to the airport. Offered يعني تبرع إنه يسوقني إلى المطار. So you can say it either way. Instead of saying he said, she said, he said, she said, we can use other words like, for example, let me think here. So instead of saying he said, she said all the time, it becomes boring. So we can use other verbs instead of said, after these verbs, the tenses don't go back. But they have many different forms depending on the verb before them. For example, I'll call the ambulance. You could say I offered to call an ambulance. Or, for example, don't call the ambulance. She refused to let me call the ambulance. Instead of saying she said, he said, she said, he said, there's others. So here we have agree, offer, refuse, promise, threaten, just like I said. Don't move. Okay, for example, don't move or I'll shoot. Okay, so this is a threaten. And then you would report it and say he threatened to shoot us if we moved. Okay, this is for threaten. تهديد. Promise. For example, I'll do that. Okay, and then you would report she promised to do that. Okay, so here's a promise. Refuse. Like I said, I'll call an ambulance is an offer. I offered to call an ambulance. Don't call an ambulance. She refused to let me call an ambulance. Here's refuse. Promise. I'll do that. She promised to do that. And then threaten, I gave you an example. And, and so these mean not to do something. So these are other reporting verbs that we can use instead of said, said, said. Okay? Here we have the reporting verb plus person and the infinitive. When we want to say advise, and then we have, the subject and then not to do something, the remaining of the sentence. Also, when we want to ask a question, we want convince someone or encourage or invite or remind or tell or warn. Also, this is plus the subject and it means not to do something. And 3, the reporting verb plus ing form. Okay, when we want to apologize for not doing something, when you are accused of not doing something, when you admit of not doing something, when you are blamed, when you insist on not doing something, when you say, I don't want to clean the kitchen, you are insisting. Recommend, regret, and suggest. These are all reporting verbs plus the ing. So here we have, in negative sentences, we use the negative infinitive, not to be, and we use the negative gerund, not being, okay? For example, he reminded me not to be late. Or, to use the negative gerund, she regretted not going to the interview. Okay, so these are negative sentences. Here we have report the direct speech using the reporting verbs. For example, I like to give you examples so you get a better understanding and a better feel of what our sentences, our writing will look like. I'm sorry I was rude. So when your friend tells you, I'm sorry I was rude, she's apologizing. Shall I prepare the meeting? This is an offer. Shall, remember, shall means offer. I don't think you should sign the contract. You are advising. This is someone advising you. Nasiha. I'm going with you to see a doctor. And this is insisting. يعني أنا بدي أروح معاكي عشان أشوف الدكتور. يعني insist. Okay, so these are report direct speech using the reporting verbs. This is apologizing, offer, advised, and insisting. Report the direct speech using the reporting verbs. I'm sorry I was rude. This is direct speech. How do we change it to indirect speech? It becomes she apologized for being so rude. Okay, shall I prepare the meeting? Direct speech. How do we change it to indirect speech? It becomes she offered to prepare the meeting, not the meal. I forgot the T-I-N-G. Next example, I don't think you should sign the contract. Direct speech. How do we change it to indirect speech? She advised me not to sign the contract. Next example, I'm going with you to see a doctor. How do we change it? She insisted on going to see a doctor with me. So here, when your friend is telling you, I'm sorry I was rude, you know that she's apologizing. So you can change your sentence and tell your mom, she apologized for being so rude. You know, you are being more sophisticated. You are using better verbs now. When for example, if I said, shall I prepare the meeting? Shall I prepare the meeting means that I am offering, I want to start the meeting. You can say, she offered to prepare the meeting. Or, I don't think you should sign the contract. I am giving you, automatically you know that I am advising you. ما توقع العقد, so this is an advice. And I'm going with you to see a doctor. يعني أنا محددة إنه بدي أروح معاكي أشوف الدكتور. So this is insisting on. So these are reporting verbs. And how do you know? By the meaning of the sentence. When someone tells you something, you automatically know what kind of sentence it is. If it's an apology, if it's an offer, if it's insisting, or if it's advice. Like I said here, we have apologize, offer, advice, insist. What else do we have? Recommend, ندم, regret, admit. يوم الإنسان admit, تحكي the truth, الحقيقة. Or accused, يوم حدا يتهم حدا بإشي ما عمله. Or deny. Deny means يعني حدا عمل إشي but they're denying it. يعني ما عم بيحكوا الحقيقة إنهم عملوه. Okay, so these are reporting verbs for the ing form. Okay, so let's go back here. We finished this. Now in our Max book, page 24. Same thing, everything that I just explained to you, direct speech is reporting someone's speech or thought in its original form. So reporting speech is exactly how someone said it in commas, okay? We put 2 commas in the beginning, 2 commas at the end, and you either put a full stop or a question mark. And the words actually are spoken and thought are enclosed in quotations, in quotation marks. And this is also, speech marks, okay? And every time there's a new speaker, we start a new paragraph. So if there is a new speaker, we start new quotations. And there should be a punctuation mark. There should be a comma, full stop, question mark, exclamation mark at the end of direct speech. And we place it inside the closing quotation. Like, can I go out? This is a question, but it's in a quotation mark. He asked. Also, if the direct speech comes after information about who is speaking, we use a comma before the first quotation mark. Mom replied, rice and chicken. Also, in reporting speech, we have the actual speech or thoughts, and they're not quoted directly. The meaning may be summarized. There is no special punctuation, and the tense is usually changed, like we said. Also, direct speech, she said it's too cold. She said it was too cold. We changed the present simple to the past simple. We know she said I am doing my homework. She said she was doing her homework. Present continuous changes to the past continuous, and so on, everything that I had just said previously. Also, note, you can use the present tense in reported speech if you want to say that something is still true. My name has always been and will always be Lynn. So, my name is Lynn, she said, or she said her name was Lynn, or she said her name is Lynn. Okay. So, and then we also have the time change. A time change, if the reported sentence contains an expression of time, you must to fit it in the time of reporting. For example, we need to change your words like here and yesterday if they have different meanings at the time of place of reporting. Like I said earlier in the video, today changes to tomorrow. That's it, just a time change. So we cannot report what they said because it would be a different time. Okay, and that's it for reported speech. We will continue it. I hope you got a better understanding of it. We will continue it next semester, but I just wanted you to get introduction about it and to know the main points and the important points about it. That's it for today's lesson. Have a great day until our next lesson.